History remembers her as a seductress, but that's a lie designed by men. Cleopatra didn't rule with beauty. She ruled with calculation. Every glance, every lover, every gasp behind silk curtains was a political maneuver. This wasn't romance. It was realpolitik in perfume. And her battlefield wasn't the Nile or the Forum. It was the bed. Cleopatra VII was not born into stability. She was born into a dynasty that murdered its own blood and married its own siblings. The Ptolemies had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals. But by the time Cleopatra entered the palace in 69 BC, the family tree was a circle drawn in blood. She was not the daughter of pharaohs. She was the daughter of survivors, and she would have to become both. From a young age, Cleopatra learned to listen in silence, to watch men argue over titles while keeping her face serene, to calculate the cost of every compliment and betrayal. Her earliest lessons weren't taught by scholars. They were taught by poisonings, exiles, and sudden disappearances in the royal court. One night, a cousin simply stopped appearing at meals. The next morning, his guards wore new uniforms. Another time, a noblewoman Cleopatra had confided in was found drowned in the palace baths. No investigation, no mourning. These weren't rumors. They were warnings. She learned never to weep where servants could see, never to speak plainly near tapestries, and never, ever, to drink first at dinner. But Cleopatra did more than survive. She studied 7 languages, philosophy, mathematics, law. She debated scholars twice her age and corrected their grammar in the margins. She was the first in her dynasty to speak native Egyptian, a queen who could charm both the Senate and the streets, and she began to use her voice like others used knives. A whispered phrase in perfect Hebrew made a diplomat blush. A passing touch during a banquet left generals unsure if it had happened at all. She wasn't offering love. She was learning the choreography of control, how to move through a room like smoke, how to laugh just long enough for men to forget they were losing. She was not beautiful in the classical sense, not tall, not golden-haired, not Roman, but she was hypnotic, and when she spoke, low, measured, in your own language, even generals forgot which empire they served. Egypt itself was crumbling, surrounded by Rome on all sides, strangled by debt and corruption. Her people saw famine while her father, Ptolemy the Huayhuas, groaned under the weight of Roman bribes. By the time Cleopatra was old enough to bleed, she knew Egypt needed a ruler, not a puppet. But first, she would have to take the throne from her own brother. She was 17. He was 10. Their names were stitched together in royal decrees as tradition required, but tradition meant nothing in the palace halls, not when the crown sat on a battlefield soaked in perfume, parchment, and blood. Cleopatra married her brother, not by choice, not for love, but because it was Ptolemaic law. Incest wasn't taboo in her dynasty. It was tradition. Pharaohs married their sisters to keep the bloodline divine. Purity, they called it, but it was a purity built on paranoia. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, was 10 years old when they were declared co-rulers. He held the title. She held the intellect. And behind the marble columns of Alexandria, their alliance unraveled like silk. Ptolemy's advisors feared Cleopatra. She spoke to diplomats without permission. She issued edicts without consulting the court. And worst of all, she was popular. The people adored her voice, her command of their language, her refusal to be invisible. A woman like that wasn't a queen. She was a threat. Within months, Cleopatra found herself erased. Her name vanished from official documents. Her face disappeared from the coins. And one night, her guards were replaced, not with protectors, but with watchers. What followed was a silent coup. No swords, no trial, just an order carried by palace eunuchs. Cleopatra was to leave Alexandria. No procession, no farewell. Just a queen escorted to the desert under the cover of night. She fled east with her sister Arsinoe, her only remaining ally, for now. But even sisterhood in the Ptolemaic world was conditional. They had shared a crib. They would soon share a battlefield. Cleopatra did not cry. She calculated. From exile, she raised an army, sent letters to Syrian generals, promised land, gold, loyalty, and her body,
if that's what it took. This was not seduction. This was siege. In her world, a woman who survived her brother's betrayal could survive anything, except perhaps a Roman.
Julius Caesar did not expect a queen. He expected a child. A girl cast into exile, a powerless pawn. What he got was an entrance worthy of myth. Cleopatra didn't walk into Caesar's chambers. She was delivered, smuggled past guards, rolled tightly inside a Persian rug, and unrolled at Caesar's feet like a living gift. Her hair was drenched in sacred oils, scented with myrrh and lotus blossom. Her skin glowed under lamplight, painted lightly in crushed pearl and gold dust. She said nothing at first, only held his gaze with the weight of a woman who knew exactly what silence could buy. Naked beneath silk, the color of bruised fruit, she stood as if unveiling herself were a ritual, not a risk. She had chosen this. She had planned this. And Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, breaker of republics, forgot to breathe. Cleopatra offered him no pleading, no poetry, only a chair, a map, a future. They talked for hours about trade routes, armies, revolts. His wine remained untouched. Hers did not. When the candles finally dimmed, the stars were already burning through the palace arches, and two empires had begun to tangle, not in war, but beneath linens that smelled of cinnamon and conquest. Caesar was 52. Cleopatra was 21. He had crossed oceans. She had crossed bloodlines. They spoke in Greek. They negotiated in Latin. And when their fingers touched, casually, deliberately, Cleopatra's hand lingered just long enough for him to wonder whether the moment was real. Alexandria woke the next morning to chaos. Not in the streets, in the court. Cleopatra returned not veiled or escorted, but unveiled, triumphant. The same advisers who erased her name now bowed at her feet. Caesar declared her queen again. Ptolemy III protested, then fled. His body was later found in the Nile, face down in a golden cuirass. No ceremony, no mourning. Cleopatra sat alone on the throne, pregnant with Caesar's child, draped not just in silk, but in myth. Some said she bewitched him. Others said she ruined him. But Cleopatra knew better. She didn't offer Caesar love. She offered him legacy, an heir, a foothold, a queen who did not ask, but claimed. Cleopatra did not give Caesar her heart. She gave him a son. His name was Ptolemy XV, but the world would know him as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Born in 47 BC, carried into the world beneath the painted ceilings of Alexandria's palace. Cleopatra did not scream during labor. She gritted her teeth and counted Roman victories, as if birthing a future emperor required battlefield discipline. She held the child to her chest like a trophy, not of love, but of leverage. This was not just her son. This was her claim. In Rome, Caesar refused to acknowledge him publicly. The Senate bristled. His wife Calpurnia wept in private. But in Alexandria, Cleopatra staged a different story. She declared Caesarion her co-ruler, painted murals of the two as Isis and Horus, divine mother and sacred son. She issued coins with both their profiles, hers, noble and unflinching, his, chubby-cheeked and already legendary. Banquets were thrown not for pleasure, but for optics. Roman guests were seated beside statues of the divine pair. Perfumed girls fanned the boy with ostrich feathers. Guests were encouraged to drink from golden cups etched with Caesarion's birth horoscope. Every bite, every song, every guest list was a message. Rome may own the world, but Cleopatra owns the air. Behind palace doors, her control deepened. Ambassadors were required to kiss Caesarion's feet before addressing his mother. Even allies knew, to reach Cleopatra, you had to go through the child. And in the child, they saw Caesar's shadow. Cleopatra had done what no one else dared. She birthed herself into Roman myth, not through armies, not through treaties, but through womb and will. Mark Antony did not fall in love. He fell under command. When he summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in 41 BC, she didn't rush. She arrived, days later, aboard a gilded barge sailing up the Cydnus River. The sails were soaked in jasmine oil. The deck was carpeted in rose petals, ankle deep. She lay beneath a silk canopy dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by boys dressed as Cupids, fanning her with silver feathers. The scent of cinnamon reached the shore before the ship did. By the time Antony stepped onto the gangway, he was already at war with himself. Cleopatra knew exactly what he craved. Not a queen, not a partner. A myth he could touch. Alexandria became their stage. Together they founded a drinking club, the Inimitable Livers, noble in name, obscene in action. Nights blurred into wine-soaked performances. Cleopatra dressed as Isis, Antony as Dionysus. They dined on flamingo tongues and sea urchin roe, drank pearls dissolved in vinegar, and wagered fortunes on the color of the sunset. But behind the theater was an agenda. Antony needed Egypt's money for his wars. Cleopatra needed Rome's backing for her son's throne. So while they whispered in candlelight, maps were being redrawn on parchment. Caesarion was named King of Kings. Cleopatra was declared Queen of Kings. And Antony? He handed over Roman provinces as if they were wedding gifts. The Senate in Rome was furious. Whispers turned to outcries. Had Antony gone native? Was Cleopatra planning to move the empire's capital to Alexandria? In truth, the performance was working. Too well. Cleopatra wasn't just in Antony's bed. She was in his speeches, his strategies, his legacy. The Roman Republic wasn't being seduced. It was being replaced. In 31 B.C., the theater went dark. The Battle of Actium wasn't a clash of armies. It was a public unraveling. Octavian, Caesar's heir, declared Antony a traitor and Cleopatra a foreign witch. He didn't attack their troops. He attacked their image. Their love, once spectacle, was now scandal. Rome no longer laughed at their excess. It sharpened knives. At sea, Antony's fleet turned. Some commanders defected mid-battle. Others surrendered without a fight. Antony, humiliated, watched as Cleopatra's ships retreated, an act she later called strategic. He never fully believed her. Back in Alexandria, the palace emptied. Allies disappeared. Messengers stopped coming. And the city that once danced to flutes now whispered only of death. Cleopatra prepared for the end as only she could. She locked herself in her mausoleum, a marble vault stocked with food, treasure, and poisons. She dressed in ceremonial linen, perfumed her skin, and waited. Antony, told she was dead, fell on his own sword. He missed his heart. Bleeding, he was brought to her, and died in her arms, his body staining the robe she had chosen for her final act. Cleopatra knew what came next. Octavian would march through her halls, chain her, and parade her through Rome like a spoil. She would be displayed, not remembered. A living warning to other women who tried to rule. So she wrote one final message. Then she closed the doors of her tomb. When Octavian's men broke through, they found her lifeless, beside two maidservants, a serpent coiled in a basket. Some say it was an asp. Others say a poisoned comb or a vial sewn into her gown. The truth is irrelevant. The result was the same. Cleopatra's body was never found, but her legend, that endured. History reduced her to lipstick and lies, to a woman who slept her way to power, to a cautionary tale. But Cleopatra was never caution. She was calculation. She was control wrapped in silk, a strategist who used the only weapon patriarchy left her, herself. They wrote about her voice, how it could disarm a room. They recorded her scent, how it preceded her by miles. But they ignored her mind, the maps she memorized, the budget she dictated, the laws she passed with ink and will. Her body became legend, but her brilliance became footnote. Rome won. Egypt fell. But for one generation, Cleopatra bent empires from a bedroom. Not with lust, with leverage. And long after her bones turned to dust, the men who survived her still whispered her name. In fear, in fascination, in shame.